Before time had a beginning, before space had distance, before matter learned how to exist, there was order. Ancient traditions do not begin creation with chaos. They begin with structure, a perfect, intelligent design that existed before the physical universe. Long before stars burned or planets formed, there was a realm beyond measurement, beyond decay, beyond death. The ancients called it heaven, the angel who defied heaven, the light that became darkness. It's the story of Lucifer like you've never heard before. Dare to uncover the forbidden truth. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more hidden histories and mysterious revelations. Not a place of clouds and wings, but a higher dimension of reality, where existence itself functioned according to divine law. In this realm, nothing was accidental. Every being had purpose. Every movement followed intention. Every thought aligned with creation. This was the realm of eternal light. Light in ancient texts does not mean illumination. It means consciousness, awareness, order, truth, power, life itself. In the book of Genesis, the first recorded command of God is not the creation of earth. It is the creation of light. Let there be light. This was not sunlight. The sun would not exist until later. This was primordial light, the source code of reality, the unseen world before the seen. Ancient Hebrew, Christian, and even Mesopotamian traditions agree on one unsettling idea. The spiritual world existed before the physical one. The material universe was not the first creation. It was the second. The unseen realm was already populated with beings of immense intelligence and power. Entities created not from dust, but from will. These beings were the angels. They were not humans with wings. They were not emotional or fragile. They were cosmic administrators. Angels govern reality the way laws govern physics. They maintained balance, enforced divine order, and ensured that creation functioned as intended. Each angel was assigned a role, a rank, a function. And there were ranks. Ancient texts describe a hierarchy of heaven. Angels, archangels, principalities, powers, dominions, thrones, cherubim, seraphim. Each level closer to the divine presence possessed greater authority, greater knowledge, and greater responsibility. At the highest levels, angels were not merely messengers. They were guardians of divine law. The throne and the law. At the center of this realm stood the throne of God, not a chair, but a symbol of ultimate authority. God was not depicted as a human ruler. In ancient theology, God was the source of all being, existence itself. Angels did not worship God because he demanded it. They aligned with him because he was reality. To rebel against God was not merely disobedience, it was self-destruction. This is why rebellion in heaven was unthinkable, and yet it happened. But to understand how, we must understand who was closest to the throne. The guardians of the light. Among the highest orders of angels were the cherubim. Contrary to modern imagery, cherubim were not children or symbols of innocence. They were terrifying beings of immense power, stationed near the presence of God. Ezekiel describes them as beings of fire, lightning, and living wheels within wheels, entities so complex that human language barely captures them. Cherubim guarded sacred space. They protected divine knowledge. They stood where no lower being could stand. And among these guardians, one was extraordinary. Ancient texts do not give his name immediately. They describe his function. He was a light bearer. The role of light. In ancient cosmology, light was not passive. Light carried information. Light revealed truth. Light sustained life. To bear light was to carry divine knowledge, to distribute wisdom, to ensure that creation understood its place in the cosmic order. This being was entrusted with immense responsibility. He walked among the stones of fire. He stood in the presence of God. He understood the structure of heaven. Ezekiel 28 describes him as perfect in your ways from the day you were created, till iniquity was found in you. That single sentence carries a terrifying implication. Evil did not exist at creation. It emerged. Perfection with a flaw. The ancient belief was clear. God created angels perfect for their purpose. But perfection did not mean limitation. At the highest level of heaven, angels possessed something dangerous, awareness of self. They knew who they were, they knew what they could do, and they knew how close they stood to the source of all power. This awareness did not trouble most angels. Their existence was fulfilled by alignment. But one began to observe rather than simply obey. Observation became reflection. Reflection became comparison. Comparison became desire. This was not rebellion yet. This was curiosity. The first forbidden thought. Ancient theology teaches that the first sin was not action. It was a thought allowed to grow, a thought that questioned hierarchy, a thought that wondered why one being should rule while others served, a thought that asked, if I carry light, if I understand the law, if I walk among fire, why am I not equal to the source? This thought did not come from outside. There was no tempter in heaven. The seed of rebellion was born within perfection itself. Free will, a dangerous gift. Not all angels had free will. Lower orders functioned like forces of nature, perfect, obedient, automatic. But higher beings were given choice. Choice was necessary for true governance. A being without choice cannot judge, cannot oversee, cannot rule. The highest angels were not slaves. They were stewards, and stewardship carries risk. Heaven before the fall. Before rebellion, heaven was not silent. It was described as music, resonance, vibration, a cosmic harmony where each being played a role. Some ancient traditions suggest that the light bearer was associated with music or resonance, not entertainment, but frequency, alignment, synchronization of creation. He helped maintain harmony, which makes his fall even more catastrophic. When harmony breaks, it does not create silence, it creates distortion. Why this story matters. This is not merely a story about angels, it is a warning encoded in ancient theology. If corruption can begin without suffering, if rebellion can be born without injustice, if pride can emerge inside perfection, then evil is not always the result of pain. Sometimes it is the result of excessive self-awareness. The calm before the storm. At this stage, heaven still stood. No war had begun, no angels had fallen, no names had been changed. The light-bearer still walked in brilliance, still fulfilled his role, still stood near the throne. But something irreversible had begun. A thought had crossed a boundary, and in a realm governed by absolute order, even a single misaligned thought can unravel eternity. This was the universe before darkness, before Satan, before demons, before temptation. A realm of light that did not yet realize it was about to fracture. In the next chapter, we will uncover who the morning star truly was, how ancient texts describe his identity, his authority, and why his beauty and power made him the most dangerous being creation had ever produced. Because the fall of Lucifer did not begin with hatred. It began with light looking at itself. He was not born in darkness. He did not crawl from fire. He did not rise from rebellion. Before the name Satan existed, before fear surrounded him, before humans blamed him for evil, there was the morning star. Ancient texts do not introduce Lucifer as an enemy. They introduce him as a masterpiece. To understand how the greatest adversary in sacred history came to exist, we must first strip away centuries of myth, church symbolism, and modern imagination, and return to what the oldest sources actually say. Because the truth is unsettling. Lucifer was not a monster who fell. He was the most admired being in heaven. The name that changed history. The name Lucifer appears only once in the Latin Bible, in Isaiah 14:12, "How you have fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning." But the original Hebrew does not say Lucifer, it says Hellel ben Shachar, Hellel, shining one. Ben Shachar, son of the dawn. A title, not a personal name. It refers to the morning star, the brightest object in the sky before sunrise. The ancients associated the morning star with authority, transition, and power. It appeared when night ended and day approached. It symbolized control over cycles. Lucifer was not named after light. He represented it. The light bearer's function. In ancient theology, angels were defined not by appearance but by function. Lucifer's function was not merely to exist in light, but to carry it. Light in sacred texts means knowledge, order, revelation, awareness, law. Lucifer was believed to be a distributor of divine intelligence. He understood how creation worked, not emotionally, but structurally. This made him dangerous. Knowledge without humility is unstable. Ezekiel's forbidden description. Ezekiel chapter 28 is one of the most controversial passages in the Bible. On the surface, it appears to address the king of Tyre, but the language quickly exceeds any human ruler. It describes a being who was present in Eden, walked among stones of fire, was created perfect, was a guardian cherub, was blameless until corruption was found. No human king fits this description. Early Jewish and Christian scholars understood this as a dual prophecy, a human ruler empowered by a deeper cosmic entity. That entity was the morning star. Ezekiel writes, "You are the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty." Perfection, not metaphorical, not poetic exaggeration, perfection by design, beauty as a weapon. Ancient theology treats beauty not as decoration but as influence. Lucifer's beauty was not cosmetic, it was structural. He radiated symmetry, intelligence, and authority. Other angels did not admire him emotionally. They aligned with him instinctively. Beauty creates trust. Trust creates followers. This is why Lucifer could lead without force. The garments of heaven, Ezekiel describes Lucifer adorned with precious stones: sardius, topaz, diamond, beryl, onyx, jasper, sapphire, emerald, carbuncle. These are not jewelry. In ancient symbolism, gemstones represented cosmic frequencies, elements of divine order. Similar stones appear on the breastplate of the high priest of Israel. This suggests something radical. Lucifer may have held a priestly role in heaven, a mediator, a guardian of sacred law, a being positioned between God and creation, which means his fall would not be minor, it would be catastrophic. The guardian cherub Lucifer is described as a covering cherub. This means he was stationed close to the throne. Covering does not mean shielding God. God needs no protection. It means guarding access. Lucifer controlled what could approach the divine presence. He understood holiness. He enforced boundaries, and yet he crossed one. The intelligence problem. Lucifer's greatest strength was his mind. Angels do not learn over time like humans. They are created with complete knowledge for their function. Lucifer understood the architecture of heaven. He understood hierarchy. He understood authority, and he understood himself. Self-awareness without limitation creates pride. The first comparison. Lucifer did something no angel had done before. He compared himself to God, not emotionally, intellectually. Isaiah preserves his internal monologue. I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. Stars in ancient texts often symbolize angels. Lucifer didn't want to destroy heaven. He wanted to rule it. Why he believed he could. Lucifer's reasoning was not irrational. He was powerful. He was brilliant. He was trusted. He was close to the throne. From his perspective, he was already functioning as a ruler. The line between steward and sovereign blurred. This is how corruption begins. The angel who could influence angels. Lucifer's authority allowed him to speak freely. Lower angels listened. Higher angels considered. This is why Revelation states that a third of the angels fell. They did not follow a monster. They followed a leader. The myth of sudden evil Lucifer did not wake up one day as Satan. There was no instant transformation. The fall was a process. Corruption spread slowly, through ideology, not force. This is why the story is dangerous, because it mirrors human history. Why this matters to us. Lucifer's story is not about horns and fire. It is about ego, about intelligence divorced from submission, about power without accountability. The ancients believed Lucifer represents the ultimate warning, that the greatest threat to creation is not chaos, but pride inside order. The moment before rebellion. At the end of this chapter, Lucifer is still in heaven, still radiant, still respected, still trusted. But the idea has fully formed, the belief that he deserves more, and belief, once accepted as truth, demands action. Lucifer was not evil by nature, he was exalted beyond balance. And when a being who understands divine law decides to challenge it, the universe does not bend, it breaks. Heaven was not a kingdom in the way humans understand kingdoms. It was not ruled by titles, armies, or politics. It was a system, a framework of existence, law, and purpose. The ancients called it divine order, a network of power and obedience, where every angel, every cherub, every seraphim, every unseen force had a precise function. To break one rule was not merely disobedience, it was destabilization. And the morning star, Lucifer, understood it better than anyone else. The structure of heaven. Ancient scriptures and apocryphal writings describe heaven as a tiered hierarchy. At the lowest levels were angels who carried out commands. They executed God's will without hesitation. They were custodians of elements, messengers to creation, enforcers of law. They did not question and they did not falter. Above them were archangels, beings of immense intellect, guardians of divine knowledge and cosmic law. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, names that resonate through human history, belonged here. Their power was matched by responsibility. At the summit stood the highest angels, sometimes called the covering cherubim, beings entrusted with guarding the throne, mediating the flow of divine light, and ensuring that nothing in existence escaped the balance. It is here that the morning star held his place, closest to God, most radiant among the radiants, a being of wisdom, knowledge, and authority. Ezekiel calls him the seal of perfection. Isaiah calls him the son of the morning. The book of Enoch describes him as a ruler among rulers, a bearer of knowledge, capable of understanding secrets that even other angels could not comprehend. The laws that binded angels. The universe was governed by law, not written laws, but existential laws, woven into reality itself. Angels were bound to these laws. Obedience was not optional. The laws were simple in principle, terrifying in consequence. Harmony must be maintained. Every action, thought, and word must align with creation's structure. Disruption in thought could cause disruption in existence. Hierarchy must be honoured. Each angel knew its rank and the ranks above it. To challenge a superior was to challenge cosmic order. Free will is limited by purpose. Only the highest angels were granted choice, the ability to act independently. But choice came with responsibility, with risk, with consequence. Knowledge without obedience is dangerous. Angels could understand secrets of creation, but to act on knowledge without submission invited ruin. Lucifer, as the brightest of angels, understood all these laws. He knew the consequences, yet he allowed curiosity and pride to twist knowledge into something dangerous. The mirror of self-awareness. Lucifer's problem was not disobedience, it was self-awareness. The lower angels were like instruments playing a symphony. Perfect, beautiful, functional. But the morning star saw the music. He understood the notes, the rhythm, the structure. He saw patterns, hierarchies, and possibilities. And with understanding came comparison. Why should God sit above him? Why should he obey a being whose existence was beyond his comprehension? If he carried the light, why should he not be light itself? Ancient scholars argue that this moment, the moment a created being questions its place, is the most dangerous in existence. The role of thrones and dominions. Among the hierarchy, certain angels were known as thrones and dominions. Thrones acted as the interface between divine will and the universe. They ensured that God's commands were not just issued, but realized. Dominions oversaw lower angels, guiding them without interference, ensuring the cosmic order remained intact. Lucifer, as a covering cherub, occupied a position above these categories. He was both mediator and enforcer, holding authority that no other angel could challenge. Yet it was this authority and proximity to God that made his eventual rebellion catastrophic. To rebel was not to disobey. It was to invert the structure of heaven itself. The importance of boundaries. In ancient cosmology, boundaries are sacred. The closest angels to God were guardians. Their function was to maintain separation between the infinite and the finite. Lucifer's beauty, wisdom, and influence allowed him to question these boundaries. Why must he remain subject to God's will? Why can he not ascend above the other angels? Why is he not worshipped as God is? These thoughts were the beginning of rebellion. In heaven, to question hierarchy was to introduce instability into the system of existence itself, the harmony of heaven. Heaven, before the fall, was not silent. Some texts describe it as a cosmic resonance, a symphony of thought, energy, and motion. Every angel was a note, every cherub a chord, every seraph a vibration that sustained life. The morning star did not disrupt the music physically. He disrupted it ideologically. Pride is invisible. It is not a weapon, but a virus. And in a system governed by absolute alignment, a single misaligned thought can propagate chaos. The first signs of danger. The angels around Lucifer began to notice a subtle change. It was not in his orders, not in his loyalty. It was in his attitude. He began to compare himself to God. He began to speak of freedom, merit, and self-sovereignty. He began to attract followers, angels who, like him, had been given free will and the capacity to understand order. This was the seed of the first cosmic war. The consequence of knowledge. The ancients warned, knowledge without humility is dangerous. Lucifer possessed intelligence beyond comprehension, beauty that commanded obedience, authority that no angel could question knowledge of heaven's structure. But the higher the station, the greater the risk of corruption. And so what began as curiosity became contempt. What began as reflection became rebellion. The laws of heaven were absolute, yet they could not prevent a being who had once understood them completely from breaking them consciously. The duality of light and darkness. Before Lucifer fell, he was light itself. Light of knowledge, light of order, light of law, light of beauty. But light carries shadows. The brighter the illumination, the darker the potential shadow. Lucifer's brilliance became the mirror of his own pride. Ancient scholars believe this is why his fall was not an accident. It was inevitable. A perfection too aware of itself will eventually question the perfection above it. The prelude to rebellion. At this stage, heaven was still intact. God's throne remained unchallenged. Angels continued their duties. The morning star still walked among them as the most radiant of all. But the thought had taken root. I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. This was not yet action. It was declaration in thought, and in a system where thought itself has power, this was the beginning of cosmic fracture. The divine order was designed to be eternal, immutable, unquestionable, absolute, yet it contained within it a fatal flaw, the gift of free will to the highest angels. Lucifer was the first to exploit it, the first to imagine that obedience was optional, the first to consider himself above even the laws that created him. And thus, the stage was set for the greatest rebellion in the history of existence. The most dangerous moment in creation was not marked by fire or blood. It was silent, invisible, a thought. The morning star, the brightest of angels, the light bearer, the guardian closest to God's throne, allowed a single thought to grow, a thought that questioned the order of existence, the hierarchy of heaven, and the nature of obedience. And in that thought, the first sin took root, the origin of pride. Ancient theologians describe sin not as an act, but as a flaw in understanding oneself in relation to the divine. Lucifer's flaw was pride, not arrogance born of ignorance, but arrogance born of perfection. He had been created flawless. He had been given wisdom unparalleled. He had been entrusted with authority. He had been adorned with the brightest light, the highest jewels, the most radiant form. And he compared himself. Comparison is the silent enemy. It is the lens that transforms admiration into envy. It turns duty into entitlement. And it convinces the observer that obedience is a limitation rather than a privilege. Lucifer looked at God and wondered, why must I obey? Why must I serve? Why cannot I ascend to a throne of my own? This was not mere curiosity. This was the beginning of rebellion. The dangerous power of thought. The ancient texts are clear. In heaven, thoughts are not private. They are energetic. They resonate. They influence. One thought, if strong enough, can ripple through the ranks of angels. Lucifer's mind, radiant and powerful, became a conduit of corruption. As he reflected on his role, he began to articulate his own philosophy. that angels could govern themselves, that hierarchy was arbitrary, that those who wielded power should not be subservient, that light could rule itself. This philosophy was a virus. It did not destroy heaven immediately, but it spread among those angels with free will, the third who would eventually follow him. The Book of Enoch and the Watchers. Ancient apocryphal texts like the Book of Enoch provide a glimpse into how sin manifests among divine beings. The Watchers, angels tasked to observe humanity, became corrupted by desire and knowledge. Lucifer's internal philosophy can be seen as the prototype of that corruption. Knowledge without restraint becomes temptation. Power without accountability becomes pride. Freedom without humility becomes rebellion. Lucifer's sin was not merely selfish, it was ideological. He began to construct a narrative that obedience to God was unnecessary, even unjust. Pride seeds. Action. Pride does not act alone. It grows in isolation and then seeks allies. Lucifer's brilliance allowed him to influence angels subtly. His beauty drew admiration. His authority commanded respect. His wisdom inspired loyalty. The ancient texts describe how 1/3 of angels followed him, seduced not by force but by ideology. These angels saw in Lucifer not a traitor but a liberator. They did not perceive rebellion as evil. They saw it as truth. The duality of light and corruption. Lucifer's brilliance was paradoxical. The brighter the light, the more visible its shadow. Knowledge without submission becomes arrogance. Beauty without humility becomes vanity. Power without accountability becomes tyranny. Ancient traditions teach that this duality is universal. The same force that can illuminate can also burn. Lucifer's fall demonstrates this principle perfectly. He was not evil in origin, he became evil as a consequence of misapplied perfection. The first strategy of rebellion. Lucifer did not rebel physically at first. He questioned authority in thought. He disseminated ideas subtly. He tested loyalty, gauged obedience, and identified those angels who would support him. This was a war fought in philosophy and ideology, not with swords or fire. Ancient scholars suggest that his brilliance was such that he could manipulate the perception of other angels without coercion, turning admiration into alliance. The nature of free will. The highest angels had a dangerous gift. Free will. It allowed them to choose truth. It allowed them to act according to knowledge. It allowed them to question orders. Lucifer exploited this. He presented choice as liberation, obedience as limitation, hierarchy as tyranny. This was not mere temptation. This was the intellectual seduction of perfection itself. Thought becomes defiance. The ancients believed that sin begins in thought and only later manifests in action. Lucifer's thoughts were now becoming statements of defiance. I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will be like the Most High. These words preserved in Scripture are not hyperbole. They are a glimpse into the first cosmic act of self-will, the dangerous power of ideology. Lucifer's ideology was simple but deadly. Authority is earned, not given. Obedience is voluntary. Perfection entitles the perfect to rule. Submission is weakness. This ideology, when spread among powerful angels, becomes corruption, not mere dissent. The first angelic faction. As thought solidified into belief, angels began to choose sides. Those loyal to God resisted the philosophy. Those swayed by pride followed the morning star. This split created a latent conflict, a tension in heaven that had never existed before. It was the beginning of a civil war in a realm where war should have been impossible. The warnings of Scripture. Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Revelation hint at this psychological process. Ezekiel 28, the perfection that turns to iniquity. Isaiah 14, the morning star's pride revelation. 12, the war in heaven. All texts describe the internal corruption first, before the external conflict. Lucifer's story warns that thought can become sin when it overreaches, when self-awareness becomes hubris, and when knowledge eclipses obedience. The silence before the fall at this stage. Heaven remained intact. God's throne stood unchallenged. Angels continued their duties, yet a seed of rebellion had been planted. Invisible, but growing. Lucifer's rebellion was not yet open. It existed as a mental construct, a plan forming in the mind of the most powerful angel. But even this thought had weight. In a realm of perfect order, thought itself carries consequence. The balance of eternity began to wobble. The significance for humanity. The seed of rebellion is not just a story about angels. It mirrors human experience. The danger of intellect without humility, the danger of beauty without restraint, the danger of knowledge without accountability. Lucifer's initial sin demonstrates that perfection, when aware of itself, can become the most dangerous force in existence. The first sin in heaven did not happen with fire. It happened with a thought of pride, a thought of comparison, a thought of self-exaltation. And from that thought, the first fracture in eternal order began. The morning star, still radiant, still revered, still in his position of power, had crossed a line. The seed of rebellion had been planted. A single thought had ripened into belief, and belief, in the mind of the morning star, demanded action. The first cosmic sin had moved from idea to declaration. Lucifer, the brightest angel, the guardian of the throne, the light-bearer, now sought to ascend above his station. I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will be like the Most High. These words, preserved in Isaiah, are not poetry. They are a manifesto of pride, a plan, a declaration, a psychological war in thought and spirit, and it changed everything. The beginning of the war. The war of pride did not start with armies. It began with influence. Lucifer did not strike with fire or sword. He did not coerce angels. He persuaded them. The highest angels possessed free will. They could reason. They could consider the morality of action. And the morning star, radiant and persuasive, offered an alternative. Obedience is limitation. Hierarchy is unnecessary power can be claimed, not assigned. A third of angels followed him. The texts call them fallen angels, not because they were inherently evil, but because they chose rebellion. The strategy of rebellion. Lucifer's strategy was both subtle and catastrophic. Ideological corruption. He began teaching that the laws of heaven were optional. Questioning authority, he challenged angels to consider why obedience was required. Promoting self-exaltation, he convinced angels that they were capable of ruling themselves. This was not chaos. It was a carefully orchestrated seduction of the mind. The Book of Enoch reveals that even divine knowledge can be weaponized. The Watchers, inspired by similar motives, descended to earth and corrupted humanity. Lucifer's rebellion was the prototype of intellectual corruption, applied to the highest order of angels. Pride as a force of nature. Pride in heaven is not metaphor. It is energy, a force that can ripple through the spiritual realm. Lucifer's thought of elevation did not exist in isolation. It spread like a resonance affecting angels capable of free will. Their admiration for him, their trust in his wisdom, created a momentum. The morning star was no longer just an individual. He had become a movement. This is why Scripture emphasizes that rebellion was not sudden. It was inevitable once the thought of pride was fully formed. The moral and cosmic implications. Lucifer's war was dangerous because it challenged the very laws of existence. If obedience is optional, chaos enters order. If hierarchy is defied, the system becomes unstable. If knowledge is wielded without accountability, corruption spreads. The morning star's pride was not a simple act of arrogance. It was a cosmic violation. It threatened to unravel the structure of heaven itself. Even God, omnipotent and eternal, allowed the rebellion to unfold, not because of weakness, but because free will is necessary. A universe without choice is not a creation. It is a mechanism. The allure of power. Ancient texts describe Lucifer's beauty and brilliance as irresistible to the angels. His radiance drew admiration. His wisdom inspired loyalty. His authority commanded respect. These qualities made the rebellion contagious. It was not enforced. It was chosen. The war of pride succeeded in gathering 1/3 of the celestial host under the banner of self-exaltation. The archangels and loyal hosts opposing Lucifer were the loyal angels, led by Michael, the warrior archangel. Michael represented law, loyalty, and divine will. He did not oppose out of hatred. He opposed because the balance of existence depended on it. The tension between the morning star and Michael was not physical at first. It was ideological, spiritual, and intellectual. The war was waged in the highest planes of existence, where thought and will are forces as potent as matter. The nature of angelic warfare. War in heaven is not like war on earth. There are no swords or shields in the human sense. There are no fortresses or armies in the material sense. Angels operate in thought, energy, and resonance. Lucifer's rebellion disrupted harmony. It created dissonance in the cosmic symphony. The loyal angels resisted. The fallen angels advanced. The result was the first battle in the history of eternity, the war in heaven. The psychology of rebellion. The ancient scholars understood the war of pride as psychology writ on a cosmic scale. The morning star embodies ambition unchecked by duty. The loyal angels embody obedience and responsibility. The war represents the conflict between self-will and universal law. Lucifer's brilliance made him a master of strategy. He did not attack. He persuaded. He did not coerce. He seduced. He did not destroy. He convinced. This is why his fall is so compelling and dangerous. The first signs of divine response. God did not immediately annihilate the rebellion. The angels had free will. The consequences of choice must be experienced. Order required testing, confrontation, and judgment. The texts hint at tension so severe that heaven itself trembled. The cosmic balance, designed to last forever, was now unstable. The irreversible moment. At the climax of this chapter, the war of pride reaches a point of no return. 1/3 of angels have chosen rebellion. Lucifer has declared himself above the stars. Ideology has become action. The morning star is no longer a guardian of light. He has become the first adversary. The line between brilliance and hubris, obedience and defiance, authority and tyranny has been crossed. The lesson of pride. The war of pride demonstrates a profound truth. Even in a realm of perfection, self-awareness can corrupt. Even among the immortal, knowledge without humility is dangerous. Even in the presence of God, free will can lead to catastrophe. Lucifer's rebellion was not sudden. It was deliberate, it was intelligent, it was inevitable, and it set the stage for a conflict that would echo through eternity. The morning star, radiant and magnificent, now stood in defiance. He had gathered allies, he had spread ideology, he had broken the harmony of heaven with the power of pride. The rebellion that began as a thought had now become action. The morning star, radiant and persuasive, had gathered a third of the angels under his banner. They were not demons yet. They were angels like the rest, but their loyalty had shifted, and with it the balance of heaven itself began to tremble. This is the war in heaven, a conflict not of physical swords, but of will, energy, and cosmic authority. Angels on both sides. The loyal angels, led by Michael, the warrior archangel, represented obedience, harmony, and divine law. The rebel angels, following Lucifer, represented ambition, pride, and the desire for autonomy. The numbers were overwhelming. 2/3 remained loyal to the throne. 1/3 chose rebellion, seduced by the morning star's brilliance and ideology. The scale of this division is difficult to comprehend. Angels are beings of pure energy and consciousness, capable of perceiving dimensions beyond human understanding. A split among them is not just conflict, it is resonance against resonance, a disruption in the very fabric of existence. The strategy of war. Lucifer's rebellion was not chaotic, it was meticulously planned. Disruption of harmony. By questioning obedience and hierarchy, he created dissonance in the angelic order. Subtle corruption. He influenced angels to believe that their purpose could be redefined. Psychological persuasion. He presented freedom as liberation, rebellion as enlightenment. Michael, on the other hand, had a simpler but equally potent strategy: containment and enforcement of divine law. He represented stability, balance, and truth, standing as a counterforce to the ideological seduction of the morning star. The dual nature of angelic war. Unlike human warfare, angelic conflict is non-physical yet devastating. Thought and will are weapons. Energy and resonance are the battlefield. Ideology and influence are the arrows and shields. Rebel angels did not wield swords of steel. They manipulated light, knowledge, and cosmic force. Loyal angels responded with divine authority and law, pushing back the rebellion. The battle was invisible to human eyes, yet its echoes would resonate through time and space, influencing every war, every temptation, and every fall that followed in the physical realm. The fall of unity. Before the rebellion, heaven was a symphony. Every angel, every seraph, every cherub was a note contributing to eternal harmony. Lucifer's defiance created discord. Even those who had not joined him were affected by the tension. Energy shifted, thought patterns distorted, balance faltered. The ancients describe it as the first fracture in eternity, a disruption of order that had existed since the dawn of time. The character of Lucifer as Commander Lucifer was not just a figurehead, he was a leader of extraordinary charisma and intelligence. His beauty inspired awe, his wisdom commanded respect, his confidence created followers. But his flaw was clear: pride blinded judgment. He underestimated the loyalty and power of those who remain with God. He overestimated the persuasive power of his ideology. Even so, his faction was formidable, a force of 1/3 of all angels, aligned in thought, energy, and purpose. The archangel Michael, whose name means "who is like God," was the counterbalance, not motivated by anger, but by duty, not by fear, but by knowledge of the consequences. Michael's role was containment and enforcement. He led loyal angels in resisting the spread of corruption, maintaining the boundaries that had defined heaven since its creation. The conflict between Michael and Lucifer represents the ultimate battle of ideology versus loyalty, free will versus divine law, pride versus obedience. The cosmic consequences. The war in heaven was not merely a struggle for authority. It destabilized the celestial order. It created a fracture in the flow of divine light. It introduced the possibility that even perfection can be corrupted. Ancient texts suggest that this conflict created ripples that affected creation itself. The balance of the universe maintained through angelic oversight was threatened. Some scholars argue that the rebellion explains the presence of chaos, evil, and disorder in the cosmos. It is the first example of what happens when free will exceeds divine constraint. The fall begins. As the war escalated, the morning star's brilliance began to change. His light became shadowed. His beauty became fearsome. His radiance, once pure, now carried the weight of rebellion. Ezekiel 28:16-17 foreshadows this transformation. By the abundance of your trade you were filled with violence, and you sinned. Therefore I cast you as a profane thing out of the mountain of God. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor. The first stage of the fall was ideological, but the second stage would be cosmic and physical. The allies of Lucifer. The rebel angels were not mindless followers. They were seduced by ideas of autonomy and authority. They were influenced by the morning star's charisma. They believed they could create a new order, one where their power was recognized without submission. The ancients emphasized that these angels were not inherently evil. They became adversaries because of choice, a fundamental principle in the theology of free will. The irreversible decision. Lucifer's war in heaven reached a point of no return. The loyal angels could not ignore the rebellion. The rebel angels could not be persuaded back. Free will had spoken, and the result was division. At this point, heaven was no longer united. A third of its inhabitants were now aligned against divine order, and the balance of eternity was broken. This was the first cosmic fracture, the moment when the light-bearer began his transformation into Satan, the adversary. The lesson of the war. The war in heaven teaches profound truths. Even the perfect can rebel. Knowledge and power do not prevent corruption. Ideology can be a weapon. Persuasion and thought are more dangerous than force. Free will carries consequence. The ability to choose is both a gift and a risk. Pride corrupts harmony. When self-exaltation replaces purpose, chaos ensues. The story of Lucifer is not just a myth. It is a warning encoded in theology. Perfection without humility is dangerous, even divine, and rebellion begins in the mind before it manifests in reality. The morning star, radiant and now defiant, had begun the war that would split heaven. A third of angels had chosen rebellion. The cosmic order had been fractured. The stage was set for confrontation, punishment, and the ultimate fall. The rebellion had reached its apex. The morning star, once the brightest of angels, had gathered a third of the heavenly host under his banner. He had declared his intent to ascend above the throne, to claim authority not given, to redefine order itself. But rebellion in heaven comes with inevitable consequence. A line had been crossed, a threshold that could not be undone. This is the fall, the transformation of Lucifer, the light bearer, into Satan, the adversary, the casting of Lucifer. The texts from Isaiah to Revelation describe the casting as a divine response to rebellion, not motivated by vengeance, not by wrath, but by restoration of cosmic balance. Ezekiel 28:18-19 emphasizes, I cast you to the ground, I will lay you before kings that they may gaze upon you. You have defiled your sanctuaries by the multitude of your iniquities, by the iniquity of your trade. Therefore I bring fire out from you, it shall devour you, and I will bring you to ashes upon the earth in the sight of all who see you. The casting was not simply physical, it was existential. Lucifer's position, his light, his radiance, all were stripped. The authority he once held near the throne was removed. His beauty, which had inspired awe, became terrifying. The transformation. Before the fall, Lucifer was a being of light, order, and knowledge. After the fall, he became Satan, the adversary, the embodiment of defiance, pride, and corruption. Light turned shadow, wisdom turned deception, radiance turned fear. The transformation was both symbolic and literal. Angels that once followed him in admiration now became demonic beings, distorted reflections of their former selves. This was not punishment alone, it was the natural consequence of rebellion. The nature of the fall. The fall demonstrates a critical theological principle. Disobedience in perfection produces corruption. Lucifer was created flawless. He was entrusted with wisdom beyond comprehension. He was positioned nearest to God's throne, and yet pride made him vulnerable. Perfection without humility becomes fragile. Knowledge without obedience becomes dangerous. Beauty without submission becomes a weapon. The fall of Lucifer is the ultimate illustration that even divine beings are not immune to the consequences of choice. The demonic host. The angels who followed Lucifer also fell. Their forms changed. Their purpose became inverted. They were cast out of heaven alongside him. These beings became the demons of Scripture, no longer guardians of light, but agents of deception and destruction. A third of heaven's host had now been lost. The cosmic order had been fractured. The first chapter of evil had begun, and its influence would reach far beyond the celestial realms. The strategy of seduction. Lucifer, now Satan, retained his intellect and charisma, though twisted by pride and corruption. He did not lose cunning. He did not lose persuasive power. This is why he became a dangerous adversary, not just to angels, but to humanity. His strategy shifted from ideological seduction within heaven to manipulation of creation itself. The fall gave him motivation and means to challenge God indirectly, through deception, temptation, and rebellion in the material world. The symbolism of light and darkness. The ancients understood the fall as a cosmic inversion. The brightest light becomes the deepest shadow. Knowledge becomes deception. Beauty becomes terror. Lucifer's fall illustrates a universal law. Power misused leads to corruption, no matter how divine its origin. The adversary is not evil from the beginning. He is corrupted brilliance, a warning that even perfection is vulnerable to hubris. The spread of rebellion. After the fall, the influence of Lucifer, now Satan, began to spread beyond heaven. His followers, the demons, would influence humanity. Temptation, deceit, and evil were now possible. The perfect order of creation faced its first sustained challenge. The fall was not isolated, it created a ripple effect, touching the realms of the material, the spiritual, and the intellectual. The cosmic consequences. The casting of Lucifer had universal impact. Heaven was divided, angels were fractured, harmony was disrupted, the material universe would face corruption. This is why many ancient traditions connect the fall with the origin of evil on earth, the temptation of humanity, and the first acts of chaos in creation. Lucifer's rebellion became the template for all subsequent transgression. The lesson of the fall. The fall teaches profound truths about existence. Free will carries consequences. Even angels, beings of perfection, face repercussions for choices. Perfection without humility is dangerous. Pride is the seed of corruption. Knowledge can be weaponized. Intellect without obedience becomes destructive. Beauty and influence are double-edged. What inspires can also deceive. Satan is not merely a symbol of evil. He is a warning of misapplied potential, a lesson encoded in the structure of creation. The adversary in heaven and earth. Even after the fall, Satan retained his power, a mind of strategy, knowledge of heaven's laws, charisma that could sway. This is why the adversary remains dangerous, not through sheer force, but through deception, seduction, and ideological warfare. His battlefield extends beyond the spiritual realm. It reaches humanity, history, and even thought itself. Lucifer, the light-bearer, had fallen, from perfection to corruption, from guardian to adversary, from brilliance to shadow. A third of angels were lost. Heaven was fractured. The universe itself bore the consequences. The stage was now set for eternal conflict between light and shadow, obedience and pride, creation and rebellion. The light-bearer had fallen. Lucifer, radiant and perfect, had been cast out of heaven alongside the third of angels who had followed him. But the fall was not merely a change in location or circumstance. It was a transformation of essence, a shift so profound that it marked the birth of a new identity. Satan, the adversary. He was not created as evil. He became evil. He was not born to deceive. He learned to manipulate. He was not made a tyrant. He chose to defy. This is the story of transformation, the journey from light-bearer to eternal adversary. The nature of transformation. Ancient texts emphasize that Satan was not inherently evil. He was formed in beauty, wisdom, and light. He was a guardian, a bearer of divine order. His proximity to God allowed him insight beyond comprehension. But the process of rebellion distorted that perfection. Pride corrupted humility, knowledge became deception, radiance became intimidation, authority became tyranny. Transformation is not instantaneous. It is a progressive unraveling of original design. Satan was forged in the crucible of choice, his essence reshaped by the consequences of rebellion. The symbolism of the fall. The imagery in Isaiah and Ezekiel is striking. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor. Here, beauty, wisdom, and splendor, all positive attributes, are linked to corruption. The ancients understood this as a moral law embedded in creation. Even the greatest gifts can become curses if misused. Satan's brilliance was a double-edged sword. It had illuminated heaven. It now cast shadows of deception and fear. From angel to adversary. Lucifer was still an angel in form, but his identity had changed. He was no longer a guardian of light. He was no longer a mediator of divine will. He was no longer aligned with the cosmic order. He had become the adversary, the one who opposes, deceives, and challenges. This transformation is critical to understand. Satan's power comes not from creation itself, but from knowledge, rebellion, and experience. He is not a primordial evil. He is a fallen angel, a perfected being, corrupted by pride. The demonic host and the new order, the angels who followed Lucifer, also transformed. They became demons, agents of his will. They lost their original purpose and function. They were now aligned against heaven, not as soldiers, but as extensions of ideology and corruption. Together, they formed a new hierarchy, a mirror of the divine order, but inverted. Satan at the top as ruler and strategist, fallen angels as generals, influencers and manipulators, corruption as the unifying principle. This new order contrasted with heaven. Light became shadow, obedience became rebellion, harmony became discord. The strategic mind of Satan. Satan retained all his intellect, cunning, and charisma. He understood the structure of heaven. He understood the weaknesses of angels. He understood the potential of creation itself. His transformation did not diminish his power. It redirected it. He could now operate freely, shaping reality through influence rather than divine command. The ancients described this as the ultimate test of free will. Even a being designed for perfection can choose to oppose the source of that perfection. The psychology of the fallen light. The transformation into Satan was as psychological as it was spiritual. Self-awareness turned to self-exaltation. Loyalty turned to defiance. Curiosity turned to manipulation. Influence turned to domination. This is why Satan is depicted as deceptive, strategic, and seductive, not because he was born evil, but because rebellion reshapes character. The psychological principle is clear. When perfection chooses autonomy over order, the result is intellectual and moral corruption. The power of identity. Lucifer's original identity as the morning star was tied to function and light. Satan's identity is tied to opposition and influence. This transformation demonstrates a key truth of the spiritual and material realms. Identity is formed by choice, not by origin. Satan's existence is proof that even beings of perfection can evolve into their opposite through deliberate defiance. The role of envy and pride. The ancients highlight two key drivers in this transformation. Envy, not of others, but of the throne, of authority, of the divine itself. Pride, belief that one is deserving of more, that obedience is inferior to self-exaltation. These forces amplified each other. Envy justified rebellion. Pride rationalized defiance. Together they transformed radiant angel into eternal adversary. The relationship to creation. Satan's transformation has consequences beyond heaven. He carries knowledge of heaven's order. He understands the weaknesses of free will. He can influence creation subtly and strategically. This is why humanity, according to Scripture, became his next arena. He could no longer challenge God directly. The rebellion had been contained. But he could corrupt the created, turning angels into demons and humans into agents of temptation. His transformation gave him purpose, strategy, and reach. Satan as archetype. Satan is not simply a character in Scripture. He is an archetype of rebellion, pride, and misapplied potential. He embodies the danger of self-awareness without humility. He represents the corruption of brilliance by ego. He demonstrates that power, beauty, and knowledge, when separated from purpose, can become destructive. Understanding. Satan's origin is essential to understanding evil in the cosmos, because it is not a primordial force, but a transformed perfection. The eternal consequence. The transformation of Lucifer into Satan was eternal. Heaven remained fractured. The loyal angels were vigilant. The fallen angels were bound to the rebellion. This division continues to echo throughout eternity. The war is no longer visible in heaven, but it persists in thought, influence, and the struggle of creation itself. Satan is not just a fallen angel. He is the embodiment of what choice and pride can produce, a warning of the destructive potential of misapplied brilliance. Lucifer, the light-bearer, had been transformed into Satan, the adversary. Not created for evil, but reshaped by rebellion. Not born to deceive, but educated in manipulation. Not destined for darkness, but self-forged in defiance. The consequences of this transformation would shape the cosmos, influence humanity, and define the eternal struggle between light and shadow. The rebellion in heaven was not contained. Satan, once the morning star, now the adversary, had been cast down. Yet his influence did not end with the fall. He retained intellect, strategy, and knowledge, tools far more dangerous than fire or sword. Through him, a new chapter in cosmic rebellion unfolded, the corruption of creation itself. Central to this corruption were the Watchers, angels sent to observe the human world, whose story intertwines with forbidden knowledge, desire, and the first acts of human transgression. Who were the Watchers? The Book of Enoch and apocryphal texts describe the Watchers as angels assigned to oversee humanity, guiding, observing, and ensuring the early development of mankind. Their purpose was supervision, not intervention. They were entrusted with cosmic insight, capable of understanding both heaven and earth. They were not meant to interfere in mortal affairs, but, like Lucifer, they were endowed with knowledge and free will, making them susceptible to temptation. Satan, now the adversary, saw opportunity. He could exploit the Watchers to extend rebellion into the material realm. The strategy of corruption. Satan's approach was subtle and intellectual, reflecting his origin as the morning star. Infiltration through curiosity. The Watchers were curious about human life, forms, and desires. Temptation through knowledge. Forbidden knowledge became the bait. Secrets of metallurgy, astrology, magic, and science were revealed to them. Seduction through desire, lust for human women, and the pursuit of forbidden pleasure drew the Watchers further from their purpose. By corrupting the Watchers, Satan extended the rebellion beyond the celestial plane, touching humanity itself. Forbidden knowledge and its power. Knowledge, when wielded without restraint, is a weapon. The Watchers taught humanity metallurgy and weapon-making, astrology and divination, cosmetic arts and enchantments. These were not neutral skills. They were tools of corruption, capable of altering human behavior, encouraging pride, ambition, and desire. Ancient texts suggest that this knowledge accelerated human fallibility, creating imbalance in early civilization and sowing seeds of chaos on Earth. The human connection. The Watchers' actions had profound consequences. Human women were seduced by angels, giving birth to the Nephilim, giants of immense strength and corruption. These offspring, neither fully divine nor mortal, became agents of chaos. Violence, greed, and ambition multiplied among early humans. The rebellion in heaven thus echoed on earth, turning creation itself into a battlefield between order and corruption. Satan's influence was indirect but strategically devastating. He corrupted angels, who corrupted humanity, creating a chain reaction of rebellion and moral decay. The nature of temptation. Satan's strategy with the Watchers demonstrates a critical principle. Temptation often comes through curiosity and desire, not coercion. The Watchers were drawn to human beauty. They were intrigued by forbidden knowledge. They sought power beyond their station. This mirrors Lucifer's own fall, desire for autonomy, admiration, and influence over creation. By exploiting curiosity, Satan transformed innocence into ambition and obedience into rebellion. The Nephilim and chaos on earth. The offspring of the Watchers and humans, the Nephilim, became symbols of divine and mortal corruption. They were enormous and powerful, capable of destruction. Their existence challenged natural law and order. They amplified human violence and pride. The Nephilim represent the tangible consequences of rebellion: knowledge and power misapplied, beauty corrupted, and divine law ignored. Through them, the rebellion that began in heaven found a foothold in the material world. The spread of ideological corruption. Satan's rebellion, mediated through the Watchers, created ideological contamination. Humans began to pursue forbidden knowledge without guidance. Pride and ambition emerged as destructive forces. Chaos became normalized, and divine order was questioned. The corruption of humanity mirrored the rebellion in heaven. Knowledge without restraint, free will without accountability, and beauty without humility created disorder across creation. The role of free will. The story of the Watchers emphasizes a central theme. Free will is both gift and danger. Angels with free will could rebel, and corrupt humans with free will could be tempted and misled. Knowledge amplified both risk and responsibility. Satan understood this better than any being. He used the agency of others to extend rebellion without direct confrontation, demonstrating the potency of indirect influence. The warning in Scripture. The actions of the Watchers and the birth of the Nephilim are preserved in texts as a warning. And they became giants upon the earth, and all manner of violence increased. Book of Enoch. Curiosity unchecked becomes corruption. Knowledge without humility becomes destruction. Desire for power leads to chaos. Satan's strategy demonstrates that rebellion is not always overt. Sometimes it works through intermediaries, subtle influence, and intellectual seduction. The long-term consequences. The corruption initiated by the Watchers left a permanent mark on humanity. The cycle of pride and fall became embedded in human culture. Temptation, greed, and ambition became part of human experience. The influence of rebellion from heaven continued to echo through history. Satan's legacy was no longer confined to the celestial realm. It had crossed into time, space, and human destiny. The Watchers, forbidden knowledge, and human corruption illustrate several key principles. Rebellion spreads through influence, not force. Knowledge without guidance becomes a tool of corruption. Desire and curiosity are powerful catalysts for transgression. Free will carries eternal consequences. Satan's war had expanded. It was no longer only a battle in heaven. It was now an ideological and spiritual conflict on earth, shaping the course of human history. The rebellion of the morning star had gone beyond heaven. Angels had fallen. Satan had been transformed. Humanity had been corrupted. Knowledge became both a gift and a weapon. The stage was now set for the first human rebellion, a test of divine law, obedience, and the enduring influence of the adversary. The rebellion that began in heaven did not remain confined to celestial planes. Lucifer, now transformed into Satan, had been cast out, yet his intellect, strategy, and ambition endured. He could no longer confront God directly, but he could manipulate creation, corrupt humanity, and continue his rebellion in subtler ways. On earth, he assumed a new guise, one both cunning and insidious: the serpent, the tempter, the destroyer. The strategic entry into earthly affairs. Satan's arrival on earth was not physical in the human sense. He operated through influence, deception, and suggestion. He understood human psychology. He recognized curiosity, desire, and ambition as vulnerabilities. He leveraged these traits to undermine innocence and obedience. His first major intervention, recorded in scripture and legend, was in the Garden of Eden. Here he would demonstrate the perfect blueprint for temptation: subtlety, patience, and manipulation. The serpent, symbol of deception. Lucifer chose the form of the serpent for several reasons: cunning and adaptability. The serpent could navigate any terrain, symbolic of strategic intelligence, subtlety, and influence. It did not strike with force, but with persuasion. Fear and respect, the form evoked caution, curiosity, and awe. The serpent was not merely a creature, it was the embodiment of Satan's strategic mind, a representation of his ability to manipulate without overt aggression. The temptation of humanity. Satan's strategy in Eden exemplifies the art of influence: appeal to curiosity. He encouraged humans to question divine law, offer forbidden knowledge. You shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. Undermine trust. He sowed doubt about God's intentions and fairness. Through these subtle manipulations, he introduced the first human act of disobedience, the archetype of temptation repeated across generations. The strategy mirrors his own fall: intelligence, beauty, and desire leveraged to challenge authority. The psychology of temptation. Satan understood the principles that govern both angels and humans. Desire amplifies curiosity, pride questions authority, knowledge creates ambition. By exploiting these traits, he transformed innocence into transgression. The Garden of Eden became the first battlefield of ideological rebellion on earth, a continuation of the war begun in heaven. The consequences of disobedience. The act of eating from the tree of knowledge marked a profound turning point in human history. Humanity gained awareness, but also guilt and shame. Mortality and suffering were introduced. The balance between obedience and free will shifted. Satan did not destroy directly. Instead, he engineered the conditions for rebellion, allowing humans to exercise free will in ways that mirrored the angelic fall. This demonstrates a critical principle. The most effective adversary works through influence and choice, not force. The pattern of rebellion. The story of the Garden of Eden illustrates a recurring pattern: identification of weakness, pride, curiosity, desire, subtle persuasion, questioning authority, offering alternatives, empowerment through deception, presenting rebellion as liberation, exploitation of choice, turning free will into disobedience. This blueprint echoes throughout history, in angels, in humans, and in every act of ideological or spiritual rebellion. The serpent as teacher and destroyer. Satan's role as the serpent is dual. Teacher, introducing forbidden knowledge, curiosity, and self-awareness. Destroyer, corrupting innocence, fostering rebellion, and challenging divine order. His method is subtle, patient, and strategic, showing that destruction does not always come through direct force. The earliest human civilizations, myths, and legends reflect this influence, portraying the serpent as both a guide and a threat. The broader impact on humanity. Satan's intervention had long-term consequences. Humans were now aware of morality, choice, and consequence. Temptation became an enduring test. Disobedience, ambition, and pride became tools in his strategy. The Garden of Eden represents the first intersection of celestial rebellion and human choice, a microcosm of the larger cosmic conflict. Through humanity, Satan could now continue the rebellion that began in heaven, extending influence beyond angelic circles into the realm of mortals. Satan as adversary in history. The transformation of Lucifer into the serpent on earth illustrates a critical truth. He adapts to the battlefield. He understands the vulnerabilities of those he confronts. He manipulates free will to achieve strategic objectives. Satan's adversarial role is not limited to mythology. He serves as an archetype for rebellion, temptation, and the misuse of knowledge and power across time. From angels to humans, the pattern remains consistent. Subtle influence can be more destructive than direct attack. The spread of influence. The serpent's influence extended beyond Eden, through knowledge, tools, and arts, through ideology, temptation, and deception, through fostering pride and disobedience. Satan's strategy ensured that rebellion was self-propagating, relying on free will rather than coercion. This is why the adversary remains a persistent presence in spiritual and moral frameworks. He does not fight directly, he influences indirectly. Lessons from the earthly fall. The episode of the serpent and humanity offers profound lessons. Knowledge can be a tool of corruption. What enlightens can also deceive. Free will is a double-edged sword. Choice enables both obedience and rebellion. Subtlety is more dangerous than force. Influence can achieve what violence cannot. Temptation thrives on curiosity and desire. The same traits that enable growth can lead to downfall. Satan's role on earth mirrors his own fall from heaven, demonstrating consistency in strategy, intellect, and method. Lucifer, once the morning star, had become Satan, the adversary, the serpent, the tempter of humanity, the destroyer, not through direct force, but through cunning, influence, and manipulation. The rebellion had moved from the celestial realm to earth, touching humanity at its core and shaping the destiny of creation itself. The story of Lucifer, now Satan, raises a profound question that has puzzled theologians, scholars, and seekers for millennia. Why would an omnipotent, omniscient God allow such a being to exist? The answer is not simple, but it lies at the heart of free will, the nature of creation, and the dynamics of cosmic order. To understand this, we must explore the divine rationale behind allowing rebellion and evil to persist. The nature of free will. At the core of creation is free will, the ability to choose, to obey or rebel, to act with conscience or defiance. Angels, created perfect, had the power to choose. Humans, endowed with intellect, reason, and morality, also had choice. The existence of choice implies the possibility of rebellion. Satan's existence is a consequence of this principle. Without the option to defy, free will would be meaningless. Creation would be a machine, not a cosmos infused with intelligence, choice, and moral responsibility. God allowed Satan to exist because free will cannot be truly free if the only option is obedience. The test of perfection. Satan serves as a cosmic test of perfection and morality. Angels' loyalty was tested in the war of heaven. Humanity's virtue is tested in life, choices, and morality. The presence of an adversary provides contrast, challenge, and opportunity for growth. Without opposition, obedience has no meaning. Without temptation, virtue has no depth. Without choice, loyalty is a void. In this sense, Satan's existence is instrumental to understanding and exercising divine law. The balance of good and evil creation operates through balance and polarity, light and shadow, obedience and rebellion, creation and destruction. Satan embodies the shadow necessary to define the light. Without an adversary, concepts like righteousness, justice, and faith would lack clarity and significance. Satan's presence magnifies virtue by contrast, illustrating the stakes of free will and the consequences of choice. The lessons of suffering and corruption. Satan's influence brings suffering, temptation, and corruption, but these consequences serve higher purposes. Awareness. Humans and angels learn discernment through challenge responsibility. Moral agency is tested through adversity growth. Spiritual, intellectual, and emotional development occurs through overcoming temptation. In essence, the adversary is a necessary agent in the moral education of creation. The limitation of direct intervention. God does not destroy Satan outright because direct removal would negate the principles of free will and consequence. Immediate annihilation would make rebellion meaningless. Survival of the adversary enforces accountability. Opposition ensures that obedience is authentic, not coerced. The existence of Satan demonstrates that powerful beings, even divine ones, operate within the constraints of moral law. The cosmic purpose of rebellion. Satan's rebellion is not meaningless chaos. It serves a higher order purpose in the divine plan. It defines the limits of freedom. It illustrates the consequences of pride, envy, and defiance. It strengthens the loyal, shaping their virtue and understanding. The war between obedience and rebellion is a necessary dynamic in creation, a story repeated across realms, from angels to humans. The duality of creation. Creation is inherently dualistic. Light exists in contrast to darkness. Good exists alongside evil. The morning star's fall created Satan, the necessary adversary. Humanity faces challenges that mirror angelic rebellion. Choice and consequence are embedded into the very structure of reality. Without Satan, there would be no mirror to test morality, no measure of divine law, no context for faith. The influence on humanity. Satan's existence is particularly significant for humanity. Temptation, challenge, and moral choice are part of spiritual development. Awareness of good and evil shapes consciousness and ethics. The presence of an adversary allows humans to exercise agency and responsibility. Thus, Satan is not a flaw in creation. He is an integral component of moral and spiritual growth, a necessary challenge in a universe of free will. The theological perspective. Theologians have long debated this question. Several key insights emerge. God permits evil to preserve free will. Absolute control would eliminate meaning in obedience. Satan embodies consequences. His existence ensures actions have stakes. Rebellion illuminates virtue. True virtue is meaningful only when opposed by temptation. Conflict strengthens creation. The presence of an adversary fosters growth, understanding, and resilience. In this framework, Satan is not a mistake, but a deliberate part of divine design. The paradox of existence. The existence of Satan embodies a paradox. Omnipotence allows creation of perfect beings. Free will allows imperfection and rebellion. God allows rebellion to validate loyalty, virtue, and moral choice. This paradox is essential to understanding the nature of creation. It is not about eliminating opposition, but about allowing beings to exercise agency, learn and grow through consequence. The eternal struggle. Satan's existence ensures an ongoing cosmic struggle. light against darkness, obedience against rebellion, knowledge applied with responsibility versus knowledge misused. This struggle is eternal, shaping the spiritual and material worlds, echoing the lessons learned in heaven and on earth. Without the adversary, there would be no test, no contrast, no measure of free will, and no depth to virtue. The question of Satan's existence is not merely theological, it is philosophical and moral. Free will requires challenge. Choice without consequence is meaningless. Virtue requires contrast. Goodness is defined in opposition to evil. Rebellion has purpose. Even defiance plays a role in the cosmic design. Growth arises from adversity. The presence of the adversary fosters spiritual and moral evolution. Satan exists not as a failure of creation, but as a necessary element in a universe of free will, choice, and moral consequence. Satan was allowed to exist because creation required an adversary, a test, a force to define choice and consequence. He is not omnipotent, but he is strategically intelligent and influential. He is not the origin of evil, but a transformed being. He is not beyond divine control, but allowed to operate within the framework of free will. The presence of Satan reminds all creation that freedom carries responsibility and rebellion carries consequence. The story of Lucifer, the morning star, the adversary, reaches its ultimate chapter in prophecy, the final judgment. From radiant angel to rebellious adversary, from the serpent in Eden to the corrupter of humanity, the narrative of Satan is one of power, choice, and consequence. Yet Scripture and ancient texts remind us that rebellion, however vast, is not eternal. This is the prophecy of Lucifer's end, the resolution of cosmic rebellion, and the culmination of the eternal struggle between light and shadow, the inevitability of judgment. Throughout the ages, Satan's influence has been profound, corrupting angels and humans, spreading deception and violence, undermining divine order. But prophecy makes it clear, no rebellion is beyond reckoning. The existence of Satan serves a purpose, but that purpose has limits. Isaiah 14:12-15, Ezekiel 28:16-19, and Revelation 20:10 provide glimpses of the ultimate fate. Cast into the abyss, bound in chains of judgment, enduring punishment for eternity. Satan's fall from grace, though dramatic, isn't permanent without consequence. The cosmic trial. The final judgment is not arbitrary. It is a trial of the totality of rebellion. Lucifer's deeds in heaven, seduction, pride, and defiance. The corruption of angels, the creation of demons and ideological rebellion. The corruption of humanity, temptation, knowledge misused, and moral transgression. Every act of rebellion contributes to the evidence of culpability. Unlike human courts, the cosmic trial is absolute, measured against eternal law, divine will, and the original purpose of creation. The prophecies of Revelation. Revelation 20:10 states, "And the devil who had deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet were, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever." This prophecy underscores several key truths. Satan's rebellion is finite in scope, though long in duration. Punishment is eternal, reflecting the gravity of rebellion. The ultimate triumph of divine order is assured. Satan's temporary power, influence, and cunning are contrasted with the permanence of divine judgment. The nature of final punishment. The final judgment is both symbolic and literal. Literal in the sense that the adversary is restrained and removed from influence. symbolic in representing the ultimate triumph of divine law over rebellion. Satan's punishment is proportional to his rebellion, extending beyond temporal existence into eternal consequence. The fallen angels who followed him share in this judgment, illustrating that choices carry consequences for those who follow as well as those who lead. The role of prophecy in moral order. Prophecy serves multiple purposes. Warning. It illustrates the consequences of rebellion instruction. It teaches the importance of obedience, humility, and discernment. Assurance. It reassures creation that divine order prevails. The story of Lucifer is both a narrative and a moral framework, showing that while rebellion can cause temporary disruption, ultimate justice is inevitable. The eternal struggle reconciled. The presence of Satan allowed the cosmic struggle to unfold. Angels exercised free will. Humanity faced temptation. Knowledge and power were tested. The final judgment reconciles this struggle, ensuring that order is restored, consequences are enacted, and the cosmic balance is reaffirmed. It demonstrates that rebellion, no matter how grand, is subordinate to divine authority. Lessons for creation. The final judgment offers profound lessons for both angels and humanity. Rebellion carries consequences. Choice without accountability leads to destruction. Justice is ultimate. No power, pride, or cunning can evade divine law. Order is restored. Chaos, while temporarily potent, is ultimately contained. Agency is preserved. Free will is exercised, but consequences follow. The judgment is not merely punitive. It is educational and restorative, reaffirming the principles that govern creation. The end of Lucifer and his followers. Lucifer's ultimate fate is described consistently across Scripture. Bound and cast into the lake of fire, deprived of influence and power, separated permanently from divine presence. His followers, the demons, share in this outcome, demonstrating that collective rebellion carries collective consequence. This final act does not erase history, it validates it, showing that even the greatest rebellion has limits. The symbolism of the final judgment. Beyond literal interpretation, the prophecy symbolizes several universal truths. Light prevails over shadow. Knowledge and wisdom misused cannot overcome divine order. Pride is fatal. Even the most brilliant being is vulnerable to hubris. Rebellion is finite. Chaos is temporary. Justice eternal. Satan's story is a cautionary tale, a blueprint for understanding the consequences of choice, ambition, and defiance. The hope for humanity. While Satan's fate is severe, humanity benefits from the narrative, understanding of temptation and consequence, clarity about the use of knowledge, ambition, and free will, assurance that moral order ultimately prevails. The final judgment is a cosmic lesson, reminding humanity that while adversity exists, ultimate justice and restoration are assured. The closing of the cosmic rebellion. Lucifer's rebellion, spanning heaven and earth, concludes in prophecy with defeat and eternal punishment, restoration of balance and divine order, reaffirmation of free will's purpose tempered by consequence. The narrative comes full circle, from light to shadow, from angel to adversary, and finally, from rebellion to judgment. The final judgment teaches all rebellion has limits. No matter how influential, defiance cannot overcome ultimate justice. Consequences are eternal. Choices echo beyond temporal existence. Order is restored. Divine authority remains. Absolute knowledge and agency carry responsibility. The greatest gifts bring the greatest obligations. The story of Lucifer, from morning star to Satan, and finally, to the lake of fire, embodies the eternal interplay of free will, consequence, and cosmic justice. The saga of Lucifer concludes, but its lessons resonate eternally. He was not born evil, but transformed through choice. He was not defeated until prophecy fulfilled. He serves as a warning, a teacher, and an enduring symbol of the consequences of rebellion. The final judgment restores order, ends the rebellion, and illuminates the eternal principle. Freedom and consequence are inseparable, and all choices, however grand, are accountable in the eyes of creation. Thus ends the story of the light-bearer turned adversary, a tale of beauty, pride, rebellion, and ultimate justice. A story that reverberates through angels, humans, and the cosmos alike.